This is the Rob Talks podcast, the podcast that is opening up the conversation around mental health, how you can look after your well-being, and how you can achieve fulfillment and happiness in your life. Please give us a follow, and I hope you enjoy. You are listening to the Rob Talks podcast, and this is episode 1 as hosted by myself, Robert McKinnon. And today's episode is going to be really a general overview of my thoughts at the moment around the whole situation with everyone's mental health as we come out of this pandemic and kind of come out of what has been a crazy last 18 months. But firstly, for anyone who is new around here, I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Robert McKinnon, and I am a third-year industrial design and technology student from Loughborough University. And I'm also doing a design internship at the moment at Unilever in Leeds, which is going great. But ultimately, I'm doing this podcast because of an experience that I had in 2019, which ultimately changed my life forever. And hopefully, as you start to follow this podcast and start to listen to more of the episodes, you'll start to understand what really happened to me and the reason why I'm doing this. And a lot of that comes down, just to kind of sum it up, is because I want to help other people to feel happy and fulfilled in life and to really be able to look after their mental health better and their mental well-being better and just be able to boss life and be the best version of yourself. So if that's kind of what you're here for, then you're in the right place. Also, just as a bit of context, I have never made a podcast before. So this is going to be a really interesting chat and in fact feels really kind of therapy-esque in some ways, but also very personal in terms of that I just feel as though I am directly talking to you guys even though you're not actually here, whoever is listening. And so I thank you so much for listening and thank you for choosing to listen to my podcast today. And please hit the follow button if you like the content that you hear today and you want to hear more, or please check out my YouTube channel, which is kind of where the majority of the Rob Talks content goes, which is called Rob Talks. And I've done a different array of videos on there, talking about anxiety, talking about authenticity, lots of different stuff, which is really cool to check out on there. And if anything comes up in the podcast today that you'd like to talk to me about further, then please reach out to me on Instagram. And my Instagram is at Robert_McKinnon. But let's get into the first ever episode of Rob Talks. Oh, I am excited. But today, the 3 main topics that we are going to be going over are firstly around mental health as a whole at the moment and how I'm kind of perceiving how people are dealing with the past 18 months and the whole experience that everyone has gone through, and kind of how everyone is looking after their mental health and where the state in general of people's mental health is at the moment. Then the second topic that we're going to be focusing upon today is in fact human connection, because I've been thinking about this a lot in the previous week, around how important human connection is and how important it is, the relationships that we have in life that keep us going and keep us grounded. And so, we're going to be delving into that. And then the third topic is all centered around gratefulness. And that is it's a topic that I love speaking about because it's so important for me and it is so important for me to be grateful. And so I think that's going to be a great topic to speak about. But firstly, our first topic that I'm going to be speaking about on this podcast episode. So, the state of mental health at the moment. Let's state something of the obvious. Everyone struggled, really. Like, it was only a small percentage of people really that didn't struggle with their mental health during the pandemic and especially during the lockdowns, because naturally we were thrown into a situation which was incredibly alien and something that we've never really had to go through before. And I just remember people, especially at the start of the pandemic, comparing this to something like World War One or World War Two. And it just felt insane because no one had really seen this coming, apart from, if any of you have watched that Bill Gates talk where he talks about the possibility of a virus coming and taking over the world in the future. Well, we kind of wish that everyone had watched that, really. But everyone's mental health was massively affected in the pandemic. Personally, for me, I felt luckily because I have a lot of knowledge around the subject, that I did okay until I think it must have been the first or second lockdown of where we got to Christmas. And that was just genuinely because every single Christmas I go up to my grandma's and we have Christmas there. And that's the normal thing to do. And it has been a yearly tradition that we've never given up. And so for me to then all of a sudden be in a position of where you're kind of stuck at home and you're having to experience Christmas without my grandma at the time. And it felt so strange and felt lonely, even though I was around with my family and I had all my family members around me. And so it was very tricky. But really that was the only main point in the whole of the pandemic as a whole that I really struggled. But I spoke to friends and spoke to other people and realised that people were really struggling, and that it was understandable because the situation people got into, they sounded horrible, in that you're stuck in a flat, you're having to isolate, and you have no one around, and you're literally just stuck between your four walls, and you've just got to basically go back to your survival instincts in a weird way. And so it's totally understandable that with the lack of stimulus, the lack of connection, that our mental health is going to be affected. And ultimately, unfortunately, in some cases, that then led people to be pushed to suicide. I remember seeing an Instagram post go around at one point, it was a fantastic video that was done by a student, I believe, from Manchester, that was just talking about suicide and how the university that they were at had dealt with a situation absolutely terribly, and where a student had just been left basically locked up in their accommodation for so long and without any connection to the outside world, that it eventually led them to kill themselves. And so the state of mental health in the pandemic was understandably hard and tricky. But I feel as though something that the pandemic has given all of us is this unique experience to every individual, despite this kind of being an overall shared experience, of an experience that we can use to help ourselves in the future. There's a reason why when interviews have been done with World War II veterans or World War I veterans, that you could pose situations to them that could be quite detrimental, such as like having cancer or having some form of really bad illness that will change their life, and they don't view it as something that bad because they've already been through such great adversity. And I think that is a key lesson that everyone can take from this pandemic that we've been in that if, God forbid, and I'm touching wood right now, of that it was going to happen again, or something very similar was going to happen again, that we would be in a position to be able to deal with it better, especially mentally, and to look after ourselves and to look after people within our communities and relationships. And so I think experience is really key to be able to deal with such crazy and adverse situations as we've had in this pandemic. But ultimately, as we get out of the pandemic and going forward, I've really started to think that we need better education really on this. Like so many people I've spoken to, it's always about we need to get this in schools, and I totally understand that and I think that is right. But ultimately it needs to be the right education about it, because mental health is a spectrum really of whether you're someone that struggles with a disorder on a daily basis, or you're someone that just naturally you struggle with your mental well-being every so often because for example, your dog has died or something like that. And so mental health is a massive spectrum in terms of where people sit on it and people's individual experiences. And so I think education needs to really cover that spectrum in a way and make it personal for each individual. And ultimately, what we need to do is educate in such a way that it can prepare people better for when an event like COVID happens, but also that it's a kind of thing that means that we're not creating such great demand on our services. So a massive thing at the moment, which I think personally, it's fantastic that as mental health is being spoken about more and more, that more people are seeking therapists. They're going to therapy groups. But ultimately, there's only so many counsellors on this planet, and there's only so many people with that qualification. And so very much thinking about this as a supply demand in a weird way, is that we either need the amount of counsellors to go up, or we need the amount of people that don't need a counsellor to go up. And so personally, this is just my opinion, I think that having counsellors is fantastic because counsellors helped me. I've had 2 counsellors in my life, which both of them were fantastic, one at university and one of them outside university, and they massively helped me for dealing with the adversity that I had been through. And so I think they're very much needed. But then ultimately the education which I've now taught myself is all these little techniques, these little things that you can do to help you in your day-to-day life to feel better with your mental health and your mental well-being. Because ultimately, if we teach people how to do that, then the reliance on services such as counselling will go down, and consequently there'll be less pressure on the NHS and so on and so forth. And so it's definitely something that needs to be brought a lot more into schools, but also there's been a big thing around that it needs to be brought into the business workplace a lot more, because I remember seeing LinkedIn posts only a couple of months ago where it was showing the statistics of the companies of where they had a mental health officer, or they specifically focused around looking after the mental well-being of their colleagues, employees, whatever, through different strategies and systems, that ultimately it made people more productive and it made them more happy and more fulfilled in their work that they do. So I think an answer in a way to this whole kind of crazy problem, which is trying to help people with their mental health and well-being, is that education is definitely an answer to help us to move forward as a society as a whole, really. So now I'm going to move on to the second topic that I want to talk about in this episode, which is all around human connection. So of course, something that we kind of lost in the pandemic, and then very intuitively and innovatively we kind of brought back through technology, was that connection between people. I've found it absolutely hilarious, and I suspect other people can relate to this, of where you have seen someone on Zoom or on Microsoft Teams, whatever platform you use. I'm not plugging any particular platform, but where you've seen someone on there and then you see them in real life and realize what height they are. Because being on FaceTime or on Zoom or whatever it is, being on a remote call, you can't always tell what height people are. And so I've had great fascination in trying to guess what height people are for when you actually meet them in person. But the use of technology within the pandemic, I think, was honestly brilliant and a really great way to kind of at least give us some connection. But in my most honest opinion, I think this whole idea around remote working and being able to remotely connect with people is good, but only to a certain extent. Because ultimately, via technology at the moment, of what people have readily available in the Western world at least, is you have a phone, you have a laptop, but you don't have a suit that your mum can put on a suit as well, so that you can hug each other virtually in a weird way across continents or something insane like that. And so it feels as though there's little things that are lost from this kind of remote connection being used as a solution. And so I think human connection really, as we're coming out of this pandemic, is so important. And I implore people to just really get back involved where you can, of course, where it is safe and safe to do so, because humans, ultimately, we need that connection. We need that on our work or on other things. We need to still keep that connection a major priority. And so with that, I wanted to speak about something that people don't always realize, and this was something I didn't realize until I researched further about it, is that there's a reason why you feel not great when you're alone. Like, I understand there are, of course, people that are heavily introverted and love being alone. I'm very much an ambivert, and so sometimes I love to be in a situation where there's loads of people, but I also love being in a situation of where I'm just by myself. But ultimately, as humans, we need community, and we need relationships, and we need others around us. We have not survived as a species by being alone, by being kind of the lone wolf that is strayed away from the pack. We have always tried to stick together, because ultimately when we put our minds together, when we ultimately communicate with each other, we come up with better ideas, we do things faster, we do things more efficiently. And so it's really needed. So next time that you're kind of sat in your room by yourself and you're thinking, this doesn't feel great, think about who is someone that you could connect with, even if it's very quickly, just via an Instagram DM, or whether it's just through a phone call or something like that. But think about who that person is and take the action to do that. Because if you're in not a great place with your mental health, and I've found from personal experience that when you're in a very kind of depressed episode, or you feel depressed, that it's natural that even if there are a lot of people around you, that you feel really alone. And so in the times that before you get to that kind of stage, I would implore you to really just connect with someone. Because even if the conversation's not that great, because let's be honest, that we have conversations some days that are just not great, or maybe it's the classic thing of that you send a message and the person just leaves you on read or whatever. And so I just implore you to message somebody and to have a conversation. And again, even if it is remote, it's something. Because I think the use of technology has at least got us in a percentage towards having a better connection. But ultimately, we will always have a better connection with people in person. And that is kind of my opinion, that is partially based on fact. But of course, I understand some people have absolutely loved remote working, have loved this whole idea of remotely connecting with people. And I think it definitely has a place. But for me personally, I'd much rather see people in person. And so something else that I wanted to speak about is that it's a kind of thing of that with community and with humans, that it's something that we have to harness a lot more. So one thing that I wanted to speak about is that there's a reason why, for example, just to give an example, that people who are from a Christian church or from a religious group naturally feel happier if they go to church every single Sunday and they join that same community, because they're in a community of people that know them, and they're able to have conversations even to the point of being quite vulnerable. And there's something so key in being in a community like that that can just make you feel so much better, because you then feel as though you are appreciated, you feel as though you are loved, you feel as though that there are people out there that value you. Whilst when you're alone, it's very hard to kind of prove that value, if that makes sense. It becomes a lot more of your own self-belief, your own motivation of what you think of yourself, which, well, when you're battling with self-talk in your head, and especially when it's very negative self-talk, it's very difficult to kind of give yourself that form of value. And so that's why I think community is just so important. And that's why throughout the pandemic, I massively missed being able to sing in a choir. I massively missed being able to be part of a production, being able to do design work in groups, being able to even just go out with friends. And it's that lack of community that has really, in a way, broken down a lot of people. And so I think the answer personally going forward is that if you find something that you're passionate about, or you find something that clicks with you, find who else clicks with that same thing. One thing that my mum has always said to me a lot, and this is more kind of work related, is all about finding your tribe. Once you find your tribe of like-minded people, or maybe not like-minded people because that can be bad in some situations, but people that share the same passion as you and want to go play football, want to go play cricket, want to go hiking, want to go gorge walking, I don't know, whatever it is, or it's an art therapy group, it's a drama group, whatever it is, connect with them. Because at the end of the day, that's what we need as humans. We need that connection. And I always implore the question of that, if you're worried about doing something like that, of so what? So the so what kind of thought is basically of where if I go, I'm wanting to join this drama group and I think that they're going to judge me because I don't like talking to people a lot, then you pose the question, so what? Does that really matter? And let's be honest with you, are they going to judge you that badly? And if it turns into a situation of where they do, then you don't have to be with them. You can go find another drama group. You can go find another community that you want to be part of. And so I think communities are the way forward to go with human connection and just valuing it a lot more. I think there are definitely a lot of people that I know within my circle of mainly probably LinkedIn connections focus a lot on work sometimes. And so it sometimes needs to be thought about. There needs to be more priority towards your life. A great person once said that it's not work-life balance, it's life-work balance. And I think that just rings so true in creating human connections with people, and especially those close to you. And the last thing that I wanted to speak about, our final topic for today's episode, which is gratefulness. And I love speaking about gratefulness, as I mentioned at the start of the episode, just because it's something that is so underrated sometimes, but in fact can make you feel so much better. Now, this may sound very weird to people, but this is a kind of mindfulness technique in a way. I remember being on a mindfulness course of where we were given two things. We were given a raisin and we were given a piece of chocolate. And what you had to do was you had to basically go step by step, listening to the instructor, and think about what you were so grateful for within every single emotion. So this was from looking at the raisin, smelling the raisin, picking up the raisin, holding the raisin near your mouth, and only then putting it in your mouth and then chewing on it. It was just breaking it down into all these different steps and feeling how grateful you feel for that piece of food, which, when you say it out loud, sounds really stupid. But if you actually do it and you think about it, it makes you realize how many things you can be grateful for. Because ultimately I find that a lot of people pin gratefulness purely upon the rich, for example. If you're a really rich person, especially if you see them on Instagram, that they should be grateful for the life that they've got. They should be grateful for everything that they've got. But even if you are at the lowest of the low and you have no money, you have literally nothing, you are homeless, you are in a dire situation, if you think about it, there is always something to be grateful for. The probability that you are alive, the probability that you were born is staggering. Honestly, you should Google it, because people take life sometimes as though it's a very nonchalant thing that it happens. You only have to look a couple of 100 years ago and people naturally were having about 6 babies plus, because the majority of the children would die due to illness, due to something medical. And so life is so precious. And so we have to be grateful for the things that are around us, grateful for the fact that we have life, and grateful for the fact that we can be on this amazing planet. And within that, I think, kind of going back to the connections topic, there is a massive thing around being grateful for those around you. Now, something that I identified in myself a couple of years ago was that I remember having a discussion with someone about love languages. Now, I know that love languages is something that isn't accepted with everyone, because I think it is it's more of a theory that is had. But I would implore you to do more research than I have on it. I probably need to do more to find out more about it. But I remember doing this love language test and essentially working out that I'm a giver. I'm someone that wants to, if I want to show love, I want to do that through making something, which is why if there is someone really close to me, I ultimately love the idea of making them a present. So making them like a personalized card, or you make them something, and it's just having that form of giving to be the way of showing my love, and then as a way of how I appreciate it. In fact, is very much spoken, but also physical in terms of hugs, and that kind of love that you are given. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in love language or not, because my point is more towards of that you have to be grateful for your family and understand sometimes that maybe people don't always understand how you show gratefulness. So the most obvious way to tell your mum that you love them is by saying, "I love you, mum." And I remember having this discussion with someone about that I sometimes struggle to say that down the phone at like the end of a phone call, purely because it's not the way that I show love, and it's not the way that I'm grateful. I'm grateful in different ways. I would much rather show my love in giving my mum a hug. And I would rather show love to my mum and family by giving them things that I've made and giving them value in a strange way. And so I love my mum, and I will openly say that on this podcast. I love my mum, I love my dad, I love my brother, no matter how annoying he is. He's probably listening to this. I love my dog, I love my grandma, I love my uncles, aunties, everyone. I love my friends. They're just awesome. I love everyone that is around me. But of course, I show that in different ways. And my point with this is that sometimes you have to be clear. You have to think about taking a step back sometimes and think about how you show love, or how you show gratefulness, because sometimes it's not always clear. So I implore you, if you are listening to this podcast, take a chance to just message someone, or message your mum, message your dad, message one of your friends, and just let them know that you are grateful for them being in your life and that you appreciate them being in your life. Because without them, you haven't got your support group. Without them, you haven't got those people that are going to boost you up on those days that you are struggling. They are your cheerleader team in an odd way. They're the people that will really, really push you. You can always find a way to push yourself, but ultimately, those around you will massively affect how your mindset is in pushing yourself and how well you do in achieving a goal. And so those around you is massive in terms of who you should be grateful for. And so one thing that I always love to think about and do, I write my own journal now, which I've literally only been doing for a month and has been one of the best things I've ever decided to do. And I always write down what I am grateful for. And that's just a very simple mindfulness technique that if you do it every night, it is proven that people are happier when you write down something to do with what you are grateful for. And so that is something to consider. And I think something that would be at least an easy step from this podcast episode that everyone who is listening to this could do. But yeah, I love talking about gratefulness because I'm grateful for so many things. I'm just incredibly grateful. And over the past week, I've been incredibly grateful. If I was to sum up my life has been full of so many medical problems and has been through so much adversity that wasn't expected. Mainly, I would say it's mainly medical, partially a little bit of school and dealing with that. But I'm grateful to be alive. I'm so grateful to be on this earth. And I'm so grateful to have such amazing people around me. And ultimately, I'm incredibly grateful for you listening to what has just been the first episode of the Rob Talks podcast. Wow. I hope that's been a valuable past half an hour or so for you. And if you've really enjoyed it, please give me a follow and let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments. Send me messages, whatever way you want to do it, and just let me know what you think. But ultimately, if there was a takeaway from this episode, just take a chance today, or this week at least, to sit back and self-assess where you are at with your mental well-being and your mental health. Where are you making human connections and making sure that you are connected with those around you? And who are you grateful for this week? Or what are you grateful for? My name is Robert McKinnon, and you've been listening to the Rob Talks podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time. You have just been listening to the Rob Talks podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and please make sure to subscribe and give me a follow on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, Facebook, or even LinkedIn. And I will speak with you soon. Stay safe and have a great week.